Well, today on Media and Society, we ask whether South Africa really is the beautiful rainbow nation story that it keeps telling. It's going to be a very big conversation that we're having on Media and Society this morning. A good morning to you, and thank you so much for joining us with you over the next hour. Before we get into that really big discussion around the narrative of rainbowism in South Africa, how the media tells it, if it really is a reflection of what our country actually looks like. Let's start with this though. The Thabo Bester saga is evolving, with police having identified the charred body that was used in Bester's escape from prison. The body has been identified as that of Katlego Bering. The body was used to fake the suicide of rapist and murderer Thabo Bester during his escape from the Mangaung Correctional Facility last year. Police say it has been positively identified after a direct match was made with the deceased's biological mother, who was from Bloemfontein. And for more on this, we now cross to our reporter, Kamaralosia Kui, and video journalist Moleboheng Khaene, who are on standby with the mother of the deceased, Monica Matsi.
Good morning to you, Naledi, and to the viewers. As you've just said, we are sitting with the family, actually, of Katlego Bering, whose body was used as a decoy in aiding Thabo Bester to escape from prison. The family has just been paid a visit by members of the Methodist Church who came to give them a word of comfort, so you can only understand how grief-stricken they are at the moment. Hopefully we'll be able to speak to them and they explain to us what exactly happened and when did they discover that their son was missing. We know so far that they did go to the police to report that Katlego was missing. When I spoke to the aunt earlier this morning, she indicated that it was around his birthday in May last year when they started panicking and saying he's not coming back home. It had been 2 months at the time, but Monica is here with us, who is the mother, Monica Matsi. Mama, ke kopa o re blele ganyane gore last year ha le tla lemoga gore Katlego nkare ha sa tlhola a boela gae ene le hane go iragetseng.
Ene le ka March last year be sa tlhole re mmona tla motlong, so ke tlile ke ne ke tlo visita mo gae, so ke nne ba ka re since Katlego kgotsa nantsa dula le mamaka ba re since Katlego a tsamaile ne le early March. So since ntse re batlana le ene o nantsa dula mo gae go sena madula, o na dula le mamaka a gona mana ya teng na dula mo gae, so ke mo batlile ga tsamaye go fitile kgwedi ya May, March, April. May ke ga tsamaya ke ya go police station Kopano ke tla ke ba botsisa for ngwana o latlhegile, then ka bula case ya missing. Ha ke bula case ya missing, it was the 17 tsa May, be ke boela gape ka di 18 tsa May ba sa fetsa o nthusa ka di 18 tsa May ke ya ka photo tsa gagwe, be ke bula case. Then after case ka bo June ke ga re ya go government mo sha re bona this thing ya Katlego is serious, Katlego a tlhagelela re mo grey.
As she's explaining, Naledi, that they started realizing in May that Katlego was missing. She then went to the police station, the local police station here, to report him missing, because it had already been 2 months at the time that he was not coming home. And then around May, they went to government mortuary to go and look for his body, but at the time they didn't find anything. And then it was only later on that the news came out. I want to speak to her again further, just to understand what unfolded beyond that time when they went to the government mortuary, until we got to this point now where they know that their son was actually involved in this matter that of aiding Thabo Bester to escape from prison. Mama, motlhomong re bolelle gore ha le fetsa go tswa ko government mortuary le setse le bone le ikgotsofaditse le lona gore ha ayo Katlego mo go iragetseng le ntse le tshela yang le ntse le mo batla kae gape
before ke ile le go dispetlele pele nominational re sa mo kry so since ntse re mo batla ene le mo TV nga ntse re sheba di news re ipotsa batho ba bolailwe ke ipotsa go motho ke butsing case mo yena ha a tle mo nna a tlo mplelela for rena o diragalang case e ntse tsa mabya so ha se bi atle next o tlile ka holiday ya this year holiday ne le ka March I think ne le Tuesday holiday a tla tlo mpotsana a se ke kry Katlego so ntse ke sheba le ko TV then taba ya besta ke be ke ipotsa ke re magbodi eo a se ngwana ka go sentse ke batla ngwana ke di body ntse tse 3 e ka ba ngwana ke ha yo mo because a kutlwe nix o tswa le poniseng le ke butsing case molo
she's explaining that whenever there was a case that appears on television of a murder, the family would wonder if this is Katlego. Whenever there's any news coming up, they would just question whether the body is Katlego. They also wondered when the Thabo Bester story broke, whether the 3 bodies that were said to have been involved or taken from the government mortuary did not include the son, Katlego. She's also explaining that the police officer who was investigating this matter, the missing person matter, had not come to the family to update the family about what was happening. He only came to them in March this year on the public holiday, human rights, that to ask them whether they had found their son. But I also want to find out from her again what then happened when the police officer asked whether you had found your son, Mama. Ha le ponisa le tla motlung le tla go le botsa gore le bone Katlego ene le hane go iragetseng ka nako e o nana le information e nngwe o na tlile fela go tla go le botsa
first go tlile le ponisa le ne ke butse case ko lona ka March le ka holiday then beke ele itileng last week Friday wa tla le ponisa ba tlontsa di DNA test ka ba botsa di DNA test tse tselentse ya tsona hona le something na e leng for le suspect ana le kry le body ya ngwanake a ba re kry le fela ditopo so ditopo ntse re checka ditopo so a se stopo se one sense re check ntse re bona le batho le bona ba llang ka ditopo tsa bona so ntse re ba dira di DNA test so that's why le wena re tlo ira di DNA test because of le wena o butsi case against ngwana gago la tlhile so last week happy Friday se sengwe se fitile ke ga le ponesa le lata ko mmerekong di tlhale re monna ke tlele lona mo Hesu then be ke re a ke tle ke chaise ke tla o emela ko toropong be ba tla maponesa go nna toropong re ya go office ya bona ba itla ba re go tlo kwa di sa maina gago a feleletse ke be ke ba butsisa di question why le abari ke le ponesa le leng o rile ke colonel ha isa le ole ke butsing case ke bona ba tshwereng case yaka then Saturday it was Friday Saturday be ba ya go nna ba itla ba ntse ba tlo ntira di DNA test tseo tsa faila last week Tuesday ke ga o tla wa Pretoria wa di forensic a tlo ntira di DNA test tse dingwe ke ga a di boa o ntirile tsona Tuesday this Friday ke ga a tla le ponisa lo anlatela gape go mmerekong a itla a re monna ke tlo lata re go hen ke bere a ke gone go tsamaya le lena papa go sa le mpolelele bothata ke eng ka ngwana ke le mokrile gore a ba re tla go nkgo le batla go mamaka so nna ke tlile after then ke khone ke tla utlwa gore di DNA test tseo di a tshwana le ngwana ke but up to so far ha ka kreya pampire mpontshang for di DNA test tseo di result di reng aka di bona so ba re ke gone ke tla di bona Monday
ba lebleletse leng sentle gore mmele o ba buang ka one kwa ga Katlego ne letsatsi le feng
ba boleletse mama ka Friday
okay she's explaining there that initially when the police came to her regarding the DNA testing they didn't disclose to her that they were actually testing her DNA against that of someone that they suspected was her son. They only told her that because she had reported a missing person to the police, that they wanted to test the DNA because other people had also reported their people missing. And on the basis of that, she then gave them a sample, a DNA sample. This DNA sample came back and it was not a match. But later on, a police officer from Pretoria arrived and took a DNA sample again from her. And last week, Friday, they were then informed that the body that was found in Thabo Besta's cell 35 at the Mangaung Correctional Center was that of their son. I want to take the conversation to the aunt, who is the younger sister to the mother, for her to just talk to us about how the family is reacting to the news that their son was actually used and how they feel that he got involved in this matter. Auswaka ke kopa ganyane fela o re tseye le mo batlile Katlego for almost the whole of 2022 ha le tla go utlwa dikgang tse le ne le ikutlwa yang?
Nna ke ile ila ba peini ho nna mobane Katlego ne ntse ke nahana hore ne ke sena believe yo ya go Katlego o shwele ne ke dula ke kgothatsa mme wa hae le nkgono wa ka le mme wa ka hore Katlego mo leng teng o hantle o tla hlaha ne ke sa lebella le hore Katlego ho tla thwe ke yena a fungwaneng nthong presenting ne ke sa idumele ho ha ne ke sa idumele because ne ntse ke na le hope ya hore o tla hlaha ka le la matsatsi.
The aunt there explaining that she had hope. She believed that he would come back. The family did explain earlier that he would once in a while go see his friends, go visit his friends, but he would always return. He would always return home. And even in this instance, they had hoped that he will come back. But as the mother has already said that she was worried, and every time she saw a murder case being reported on the news around Bloemfontein, she would worry about whether that person is her son or not. Mama, ke tlo bua le wena gape ke utlwa gore wena maikutlo a gago ka se tlhagileng ha o tla go utlwa dikgang tsa gore ngwana gago kene a dirisitsweng mmele wa gagwe kono dirisitsweng mo go thuseng Thabo Bester gore a sie ko tronkong maikutlo a gago keng?
I ka sia matutsa ke botlhoko tatele ke botlhoko.
Grief-stricken, a mother who cannot understand or accept what happened to her son. As you know, we've been reporting on this matter about a body that was discovered charred, burnt in cell 35 at the Mangaung Correctional Service, a body that was used as a decoy to aid Thabo Bester to escape. For the whole year of 2022, the family looking for their son, going to the government mortuary, going to the hospitals around here, just looking for their son, not knowing that even at the government mortuary where they went, their son was there, but they couldn't identify him. Inconsolable. When we spoke to the grandmother earlier, she said when she heard about the 3 bodies, she knew immediately that it was her grandson. I would like to bring her into the conversation for her to talk to us about how she knew that, how could she tell when the whole family was still hopeful, when the whole family was questioning, how did she know that it was her grandson who was found in that cell?
Mkhono
ke bua le wena earlier and then o bo re bolella gore wena o no itse immediately gore ngwana mmele o kreilweng ko G4S ko tronkong ke mmele wa your grandson. Wena o ka re bolella gore o itsile yang immediately gore ke ene?
Ke motho a dulang mo hae mo. Ke dula ke shebeletse TV. Since from ntho ya besta e hlale le nandito. Ya be ke ba belte haholo jwale ka tabena ya ngwana wa moradi ya ka. Mara itse jola se ke bona ho hlahisa ditopo tsena. Sena se ntse se phapalla bomaitse. Se repi. Ka re topo se sempela etsa hore ke se sentse ditopo tsa ngwana tsa mmele wa ngwanaka. Waya ka bona sane jwale ke nang dipaka mona ke besta ka mo le ka bekile na phatse le ka bele nna ntse dituka ka seleng re nnete ya sala maikutlo a ka nne hore mona molongo ke ngwana ka yona ntla tša mo ka sa le nna ke na le pela e hore ngwana ni wa ngwana ka ke mong ditopong tse.
The grandmother there explaining that she stays home and she's always watching the news. So when the news broke and she saw how the story unfolded, she immediately knew that there wasn't a way that her grandson would be missing for an entire year, not calling home, not informing anyone about his whereabouts. She knew rather that that body that was in that prison cell was her son's body. In the conversation I had with the family earlier, they did tell me that Katlego had 2 kids, a 2-year-old son and a 4-year-old daughter. And now it is the responsibility of their family to take care of those 2 children. But what remains a question perhaps to the entire country is, how did this body end up there? And when that body got there, was it a sacrifice that was done to ensure that Thabo Bester escapes from prison? There are many questions that need to be answered. But today, the family is grief-stricken. We will continue monitoring the story for you, and as we have updates, we will come back to you. With that, it's back to you in studio.
That's Kamagalo Sikwe speaking to us there from Bloemfontein, having what is truly a heartbreaking discussion. Let's take a short break. We're back in a moment. Welcome back. Well, you're watching Media and Society. Let's get into our discussion for this morning. So, South Africa was first dubbed the Rainbow Nation by Archbishop Desmond Tutu. This is following the country's first fully democratic elections back in 1994. This very aspirational statement, I suppose, spurred a flurry of PR, public relations, that was plastered over many cracks that have only deepened over the past 29 years. As Freedom Day approaches, we ask today whether that beautiful time that imbued so much hope in us did more harm than good. And how's the media telling the story of rainbowism in South Africa? Are we now paying dearly for what was left unattended in the rush to a neat ending to the apartheid era? It's a big discussion. And what's the role of the media in all of this? And to take that discussion forward, I've got some guests via Zoom. We are joined via Zoom by Ibrahim Dean, who is a researcher at Brand South Africa, who'll talk to us about the story that South Africa tells about itself to the world. We're also joined by Kim Hiller, who is an author, and she's written an enlightening book. It's titled No White Lies, an enlightening read on the state of the Rainbow Nation in South Africa. And then the CEO of Ditshego Media, Tebogo Ditshego, who is also a media analyst, joins us in studio. Tebogo, good morning to you as well.
Good morning, Naledi.
Yeah, I think, Kim, I want to start a little bit with you, because I obviously spent the week reading your book, and I can't tell you how many times I was shocked that we have a white South African woman who was sharing some of the views that you shared. And I'm going to quote a bit from the book, but I want to start with 1994. South Africa tells the story of this democracy, this rainbow nation. At that time, what did you make of that story that the media was telling of itself to South Africans in the world?
Thank you very much, and good morning to your guests and your viewers. I I have always seen the Rainbow Nation as a great white lie, actually. And unfortunately, our history is replete with convenient lies about the state of our social, economic, and cultural landscape. So what we had in 1994 was the promise of a rainbow, while we chose not to, or we pretended that we didn't have a huge storm that had come before that. So for centuries, before the Rainbow Nation, Black South Africans had been caught up in a devastating storm, not of their own making, which had rendered them economically dislodged and poor and landless, once again, not of their own making. And the Rainbow Nation was a myth that actually, although it was portrayed as a way of freedom and a pathway to freedom, actually, I think was more of a stillborn democracy, which actually put Black liberation on the side and delayed it. So I think that the Rainbow Nation, unlike it's often presented in glowing, bright and liberatory terms, was a great, just a great white lie that has actually not healed or liberated or brought a just society. In fact, all it's done is extended the tender of whiteness into a so-called democracy. And my last comment on this opening is to say that this week people were commemorating the great leader Chris Hani, and he said most profoundly that if we want peace, we must fight for social justice. But we can't have rainbows without some work and redress. So we are in an awful situation today because for the last 29 years we've been living in a paradigm that is out of touch with the lives of ordinary South Africans, particularly Black South Africans.
I think it's a difficult conversation to have, because essentially what we're saying is we really need to look at the pain that South Africans are still in a democratic South Africa. But I'm still going to go back to that 1994 period. And Ibrahim, maybe this is where I bring you in here, because as much as we're talking about how, and Kim is saying, that idea of a rainbow nation was very much a white lie, there is so much nostalgia about 1994. I mean, I think about the songs, South Africa, our land, our beautiful land, these beautiful songs, the images of the doves and this peace, this idea that we could be this united nation. Let's go back to 1994 and just how successful of a PR campaign really that was.
Okay, so as Brand South Africa, we're the custodian of the South African brand. And so we look at the nation both internally and externally. And I mean, we can comment a bit on the internal views as well. But the PR of the Rainbow Nation, or the brand, from a global perspective, in our research, was very successful. Was very successful. We recently compiled a study surveying respondents from 13 different markets. And a big issue or big area covered or still informing people's view on South Africa globally, is actually Nelson Mandela and South Africa's history and the history in cells of trial. And so that was very successful. And I think, yes, when we're looking at 1994, and I mean, we can only comment on research we've compiled since 2017, looking at domestic perceptions. But, national pride in South Africa and South Africa's history still sits at about 66%. So, there is a story. And yes, our research, has surveyed over 33,000 people over the past 5 years. Ordinary South Africans, face-to-face surveys, focus groups, monthly online polls looking at what South Africans think about South Africa. That's a big part of what we look at. So we make sure that the brand we represent is also, or that we put forward, is representative of the people in South Africa. And, the story, yes, there are challenges. And the story, though, is that 1994 is still seen as critical in influencing our history. And, there is still a big sense of national pride at what we have done, what we have overcome. And I mean, not, as I said, not taking for granted the fact that there is challenges, but, at an individual level, there has been successes. And I mean, I think when we critique and criticize, we do need to have a picture that is, fully contextual and fully accounts for these different factors and the different nuances within these factors.
Yeah, I think that certainly Brand South Africa has quite a big responsibility and a big job on your shoulders there, because you do need to sell the brand to the world. But we also, I suppose, are calling for an honest look at whether or not that brand is representative of who we are. Tebogo, you look at the media landscape across the board, right? And I talked about that campaign that was 1994. You remember the doves. You remember just the euphoria, the actual media campaign that was this brand new South Africa. Talk to me about whether or not you feel that was successful and how we ensure that we can at some point live up to those images.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think before we look at the success, we need to understand what is a brand. And it's very important because a lot of people don't understand the difference between having a brand and a PR campaign and what is marketing. So a brand is a promise of a certain quality of product or service represented by a sign or a symbol. And what is important there is the promise. So if you make a promise and you break it, then your brand is weak. If you make a promise and you keep it, then your brand is strong. And so you can't just go out in the world and talk about a rainbow nation and not back it up with substance. So as soon as you do that, you discredit yourself immediately. So I would disagree, that the branding of South Africa has been a success. It has been a failure. And we have not even been able to tell our own stories internationally. And it's not a failure necessarily only because, there's nothing that is happening that's positive in South Africa. It's a failure because we have not put enough resources behind ensuring that we're keeping the promises that we make. Now, how could we say that we have a rainbow nation when you look at the marketing, advertising, and communication industry? 2021, it made 47 billion rands. Of that 47 billion, less than 5% went to black-owned companies. Less than 5%. You've got one company in that sector that is making more than all black companies combined. One advertising agency, So how do you say that you're succeeding when you can't even transform one particular sector? And it's across the board. And when we talk about transformation, you have to be broad-based. Transformation in terms of access to quality education. Can we say that we're a rainbow nation in terms of providing everybody with high quality education? No. What about access to healthcare, quality healthcare services? Are we a rainbow nation in terms of that access? No, we're not. In terms of gender equality, in terms of crime, and we need to know that socio-economic development, at the heart of it, is transformation. If we do not transform our society, we will not be able to deal with our socio-economic challenges. And you were talking about a story that was happening recently. The crime is so high because we have failed to transform. But I think in closing, it's important also that if you look at our country, we are not together in terms of where we need to go. And that is why, even if you do make initiative to transform, you're going to have a lot of pushback.
Yeah, well, we're going to take some calls on this one. 011-714-0661. Really keen to hear your thoughts. 011-714-0661. We're talking about how the media tells the story of a South African rainbow nation. Is that really a representative of who we are as a country? Really keen to hear your thoughts. Kim, I'm going to bring you back in here because one of the things that you've done in No White Lies is, I suppose, even sit on the point that Tebogo just made, that without economic transformation, rainbowism remains a utopian idea that we simply are not going to see.
Yes, exactly. And I thought that Tebogo made an excellent point. It speaks about any successful brand is as strong as its promise is. And what we've seen with the ANC, unfortunately, is that they've broken promises. In fact, for the last 29 years, people have been living on hope, but they're finding that it's not enough sustenance. And I've written quite extensively about how the hope of a people who have been denied human rights and have been violated and subjected to the most racial tyranny that we've seen across the world. All they wanted was hope for a better tomorrow, which was a promise that the government made. And that realization is yet to come. So we're seeing that hope turning into despair. And my prediction is that we're going to see a huge storm after the Rainbow Nation. We normally have a storm and then a rainbow, but now we're going to have a rainbow and then a great storm. And unfortunately, there's been no social economic transformation. Tebogo spoke about even in the communication industry, it's still a white man's paradise, actually. In the same way, we have Black South Africans who have never got back their own land, and that the ANC has taken such slow steps to get back land into the rightful owners is a tragedy that of the so-called transformation. And in every single sector, we see Black people still being second-rate citizens in their very own land, in every single sector. Culturally, too, we have an imposition of white cultural norms in a country that is a Black country. So the phenomenon of white supremacy is still large. And I often say that South Africa remains a colony today where white supremacy is the order of the day, despite the illusion that we have a Black government that serves the majority of Black people.
Yeah, we're gonna continue this discussion and talk about how Brand South Africa then deals with these inequalities when the world asks and says, well, you are one of the most unequal countries in the world, that you are the rape capital of the world, that you have all of these challenges and that racial tensions continue to bubble. How do they deal with that when they tell the story of South Africa to the world? How do they answer those questions? We're going to do that and a lot more on the other side of this short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching Media and Society with myself, Naledi Moleo, right here on SABC News. And we continue our discussion around how South Africa, certainly its media, tells the story about rainbowism, right? The Rainbow Nation. Is it a true reflection of who we are as a country? And are South Africans buying into that narrative as well? Taking your calls on 011-714-0661. Very keen to hear what you make of this discussion. Ibrahim, I'm going to come back to you and say, before we went into the break, one of the points I made was you've got a really tough job, because your job is to go out and sell the brand to sell the brand of South Africa to the world. What do you do then when the issues around inequality and racial tensions still are brought up to Brand South Africa? How do you fix that conversation when you sell the brand?
I think there's two components to this question. One is the component of looking at what South Africa say about South Africa. And I think sometimes the media and most of us forget that we don't actually canvass the views of ordinary South Africans. And that's why I think a big part of our research has been looking at what South Africans say about South Africa. And, there is the challenges, but we just put these challenges into government versus no government. When we're actually looking at South Africans themselves, and many of them are still very proud and many of them are hopeful. And our research, as I said, is conducted individually or are conducted survey-based, questionnaire-based, focus group-based. So there's a individual and a statistical component to our research. So the view we try to present is one that is accurate and representative. And looking at it globally, I think the world does recognize that there is challenges, but that it's only 30 years since we've become a democracy. And our research and globally shows that 35% of surveyed individuals, we've surveyed over 7,000 individuals last year from 13 different countries, including the US, the UK, China, Japan. And their views of South Africa has actually improved last year, 35% of respondents, 3% actually worsened. So, yes, there are challenges. And yes, we need to be representative, accurate, and also reliable and reputable and credible. But, in terms of the brand of South Africa, one is I think we don't recognize that we still have a good brand and that the brand is still seen as good by both South Africans and globally. And two is, we must recognize that we are a brand competing in the brand of global brands, like there's different countries. And, the challenges that we face may be significant, but challenges in other countries are sometimes more significant. And for example, a big part of, if you're looking at our brand, is tourism numbers has increased last year. The South African Investment Conference raised, Cyril, the President Ramaphosa wanted to raise 1.2 trillion. He raised 1.5 trillion in the same time. So, we forget the fact, and this is, I think, sometimes when we look for the negative and not look at the accurate, real story.
Yeah, I mean,
Is that there's a lot of our brand that is valuable, and that we don't value.
Yeah.
But South Africans do.
Well, I mean, and I suppose that you do have the responsibility of offering the optimistic view. We're taking your call, 0117140661. Precious is a South African who is watching from Malawi. Precious, good morning to you.
Good morning to you and good morning to our viewers. Yeah, I actually wanted to comment on this rainbow narrative, and I'm glad that I could come through. Because as a South African who lived in South Africa and is still living in South Africa, traveled to the African continent and have compared to what the other African countries look like. I think we need to revisit the definition of a rainbow nation in South Africa. We also need to go back and define what the narrative is trying to achieve. Yes, we went through democracy. Yes, we think we have been liberated from apartheid, which I personally don't think was a full liberation. But in coming to the narrative itself, the country has gone into what I personally call a regression, in the sense that we are seeing ourselves now no more being captured by apartheid, but we are captured by a system where there's no direction. We have got a government that is failing to raise the people economically, psychologically, physically, and safety-wise. And that narrative of rainbow nation needs to look at what other countries are doing when it's talking about the rainbow nation. It's freedom, economically, psychologically, socially, and otherwise, which in South Africa is not the case. I want to go back to the issue where the other gentleman referred to us fighting ourselves and being confused. And I think what we see now in government is clearly articulating to where we have missed it as a system of what are our priorities, objectives of being in a democratic government. There's no service delivery. People are in government to enrich themselves. They've lost the idea of doing what was supposed to be benefiting the masses of the country. And you go back and say this is a rainbow country. Okay. People are still poor. People are still enslaved within their own systems. Salaries are not equal. There are still those inequalities between women, children, and everything. For me, I'm telling you, the 1994 democracy in 2023 is still back to where we are. I am an ANC cadre. I am a government employee, but I think there's much to be done.
Precious, I need to step in because I do need to move on. But thank you so much for calling in and sharing your thoughts. Taking more calls, 0117140661. Kim, I'm going to come back to you because I want to quote now from the book, because there's a specific page in the book that I think really took me, shocked me a little bit. You said, and I'm reading from the book, "Being white in South Africa is a crying shame. The wholesale participation in white South Africans in marches against President Jacob Zuma is not a mark of anti-apartheid solidarity. It is a mass demonstration of a moral hypocrisy and bankruptcy, which is so often the handy preserve of the privileged." And you go on to say, "I found the extravagant outcry from whites who line the streets, the paved one, of course, to protest against a president vulgar. If the president is guilty of any ethical or governance transgression, he must be held accountable like any South African by the courts and by the people. I'm not standing for or against Zuma. I'm simply saying that white South Africans who have never accepted culpability for the carnage of apartheid and colonialism to be omnipresent in such a march is disturbing to me." I mean, that little paragraph there is explosive. Because it takes us back to 2017 when we watched those marches. And I thought to myself when I read it, what is the role of politics in deepening the racial divides that we have in South Africa?
Yeah, I think I write a lot in the book about whether white people, of which I'm one in South Africa, whether we have a moral compass, because we've never expressed that. I write that we've had marathon opportunities to offer reparations for crimes against humanity that we committed or our forefathers committed. And one of the greatest acts of corruption and inhumanity is how white people stole the land of black people, and that's never been addressed. And I'd hoped in the Rainbow Nation we would make sure that the color of poverty was not as black as it has been, but it's remained like that. And you read about a march. I say that South African white people have found expression in anti-Zuma marches rather than in marches which speak to the lack of economic transformation, the lack of apology, and the cry for forgiveness that white people should have done long time ago, and asked forgiveness for their great sins from black South Africans. And those things haven't taken place. And I raise, I like to raise uncomfortable situations and stories, because unless we face the truths, we are going to be wrapped in this nonsensical PR of a country that doesn't exist. So white people have found great shelter in the Rainbow Nation. And in fact, they've been emboldened to speak and express their racism quite comfortably because the ANC government has given a lot of voice to white South Africans. And so our voice is still prominent, and it's a crying shame that in a black democracy, the words and voice of a white person, a white woman, a white man is still superior and given more equity than that of a black counterpart. So I think we're in a terrible state. I think white people in particular have shown no remorse, no reparations. My attempts on my side to try and get a reparations movement in this country have fallen to nothing. And it makes me think that white people in South Africa will never do anything for social justice. Sure. And it's about time that black South Africans realize that and do not count on the goodwill of white South Africans, because there is no goodwill.
That's a lot. Let's take more calls. 0117140661. Ntlanhla's on the line in Johannesburg. Ntlantla, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for the topic. I just want to touch on the role that media plays as well in this Rainbow Nation narrative. I think they also have been complicit in pushing the narrative and not shining a spotlight on the different inequalities that do appear. So what happens, for example, the story in Phoenix is not covered the same way as a story of a black person who might have committed a crime. It seems like such things we quickly want to rush and sweep under the carpet because those tensions that are there don't only exist in that particular area, but they exist across the country. It would seem as if that the enemy in this country is a black person. And by a black person, I mean a South African black person, because everyone needs to come first before the South African black person. Even the notion of people from other countries have more rights than people of this land it seeks to diminish whatever prominence that they have. It seeks to diminish whatever issues they try to raise, and it wants to turn them into nothing, except for the narrative is created they are black lazy people and we want nothing to do with them. And the media continues to perpetuate that same narrative. And every time people start to rise, like with the July unrest, it is barbaric, and it is, no, we should remember the Rainbow Nation. But this is such an unequal society that the only thing that has changed is the person who's actually cracking the whip.
Okay. Yeah, let's leave it then. Tanda, thank you so much for calling. What do we do?
I think we need to look at what are we going to measure, because if we're going to achieve transformation, it has to be measured. The World Economic Forum has a gender gap index. We need to have a racial gap index. And you have to segment it into education, equal access to education, quality education, and also what is the content of the actual education. Then you go into healthcare, then you go into economic development, then you go into spatial planning, land ownership, then you even have to go into culture. You know, in terms of your culture being, you being able to celebrate your culture being documented, you know, and really your culture permeating society, which is language, your psyche, you know, and also your historical consciousness. So we need to look at it in that context. Until we start to measure it, we're going to continue to, start to trying to hit a bullseye that doesn't exist.
Yeah, I want to stay with you though, because look, and Ntantla talked about this as well, that we hit a storm and then we come back and as the media, we go back and we say, no, but we're a rainbow nation, let's not do this, let's not burn the country, because we are unity and diversity. That's who we are as a country. So what is the story then that we do tell when we hit a crisis?
I think it's good that we aspire to be a rainbow nation, that we aspire to be united in our diversity, but that has to be based on the policies and the implementation of the policies that will make it possible. Until we reach a point where we can say that all South Africans have a fair opportunity to realize their potential, you can't say, that we're united in our diversity.
Okay. Ibrahim, I'm going to let you take a last shot here as well. You've got the big responsibility of telling the world that South Africa is unity in diversity. I mean, some of the goals and targets that you want to hit, and really what you think you want South Africans to take from this discussion to get us at least somewhere closer to the picture that you're showing to the world.
Okay, I think there's two things. One is, I think, no one can not admit there is governance challenges. And in our research, people said and we do see, people do complain about governance and trust in governance and trust in political parties in general. So that's there. But when we look at the South African rainbow nation, we need to look deeper. What do South Africans think? And our research in that sense seems to be positive. Tebogo was talking about indicators, and I think it's very interesting. South Africa finished, I think we were 28th globally in the gender gap report. The third highest on the African continent. Our human development index over the past year actually improved. We're still sitting at 7.72, if I'm not mistaken. So, there's challenges in South Africa, and no one says there isn't. And I think, being representative or trying to be, as Brand South Africa, our mandate is being representative of South Africans and actually looking at what South Africans are saying. And so there are challenges, but there's also prospects. And I think, the past couple of years from our research, we're seeing that people are now starting to do things and take more actions and become what we would call more active citizens. And that's something that we don't talk about, but that should be acknowledged, that, we are maturing as a nation. And I mean, some of it is because of these challenges. I mean, no one can say some of it is not because of this, but, slowly but surely, South Africans are helping the issue.
Yeah.
Deep down, we're actually seeing these indicators go up. That, social cohesion, is a bit less than it was 5 years ago. But active citizenship, national pride is actually very stable. And the trend line on active citizenship has actually enhanced over the past 5 years. So, there's challenges, but South Africans are resilient. And we're good at overcoming challenges. And I think that's the big part of the South African nation.
You certainly are giving us the silver lining, and we do appreciate it. Kim, I've got less than 30 seconds, but from you, are you optimistic that we can get to that unity and diversity story that we tell?
I think that we need to have really uncomfortable and authentic conversations before we start speaking about non-racialism, because non-racialism is actually, and this dream of being equal and equitable and just, it's not a reality of everyday life. We can get pretty diagrams in the media, we can get lovely statistics, but the life of an ordinary Black South African is a day of difficult survival, and Rainbow does not help. Yeah. So I think in essence, it's about telling truthful, authentic stories about the struggles of everyday South Africans. And only then can we start looking at the healing, because we've got an untreated pandemic of white supremacy and white power that has never been dealt with.
Yeah.
And if we continue with that, we are going to continue to have exactly the same conversation next year and years after that. And that would be a great travesty of the legacy that we're going to be leaving to our children and future generations to come.
Kim, thank you so much for joining us. An absolute pleasure having you. Kim Hellers, the author of No White Lies. Thanks as well to Ibrahim Dean, who is, of course, a researcher with Brand South Africa. Tebogo Ditshego, the CEO of Ditshego Media as well. And from myself, Naledi Moleo, and the rest of the team, it's been a wonderful discussion. Look forward to spending time with you again next week, Sunday, right here on Media and Society. Have yourselves a wonderful day.